Flipping the Pyramid is a group of individuals that have come together under a common cause: truth. We aim to discover the truth about our world and the issues it faces. Floating in a sea of misinformation, outright lies, blatant propaganda, and institutionalized indoctrination, we aim to see the world as it really is, not as we're told it is by our politicians, the corporate-controlled media, the agendized academia, or the failed dogma of religious prejudice. When we look into the future, we see the darkest events from our past revisiting us. We do not believe this is a result of a natural path for humanity. We believe there is an agenda at work. This is not to say we believe in conspiracy theories. We believe that to stand any chance of changing the pattern of war, death, starvation, and financial desperation, and of having a truly free and fair world for all, without exception, we must first understand what is really taking place, who is responsible, and what the desired outcomes are. Together, we are flipping the pyramid. www.flippingthepyramid.co.uk.
And now, live from England, bringing you news and analysis that you won't find on the corporate and government mainstream media. It's the WideShut Webcast.
Good evening, people. How's everybody doing tonight? That song there was Nate and Wake Up, and I want to give a shout out to Red, who's getting all the tunes up on Flipping the Pyramid section there on the website, with lots of truth, alternative music, if you will, hip hop, reggae, rock, lots of stuff up there, and I randomly picked that one, Nate and Wake Up. You are, of course, tuned in to another episode of the WideShut Webcast with me, Keelan Balderson. We are broadcasting, as we do every week, at 8 PM on FTP Radio. The website is flippingthepyramid.co.uk. My personal website, with all of my free-to-watch documentaries and news articles and so on, is wideshut.co.uk. If you want to listen to the show in another format for any reason than you are right now, we are on iTunes. You can also download the standalone MP3 file to do what you want with. You can stream it from YouTube, as always. And we're also on Stitcher, the Stitcher application for mobile devices. You can listen through that. So lots of ways to get the show. And I'm actually pretty happy with Stitcher. Hundreds of new listeners since we've got on there, according to the statistics that they give you. We're actually ranked 717 out of all podcasts on Stitcher, which is actually pretty damn good considering there are thousands of other shows. So big up to all the listeners out there using Stitcher. We welcome you aboard, and I hope that you enjoy it and maybe learn something from my meandering views on the world. Lots to get into today. We got a bit philosophical last week, exploring the concept of determinism, the idea that every action we make, every so-called choice that we choose, is actually predetermined by what came before and the conditions of the environment. You can only make a decision based on your environment and your life experiences. So it really isn't a decision, more of a complex predetermined outcome that the brain is not necessarily privy to, because we can't calculate all the variables and we have the illusion of free will. Definitely sparked some discussion on YouTube and a few forums that I post the show on. Personally, I'm not 100% sold on the idea that we have no free will whatsoever. I'm not 100% sold on anything. You know, things change, you grow as a person, we're always learning and changing our opinions on things, so I'm not going to be militant on determinism, but it is an interesting concept, and I think some of it does hold weight. And in terms of the justice system, we definitely need a more compassionate approach, whether there's 100% hard determinism or not. There are causes and things that go into crime. People aren't necessarily choosing to be criminals. They're brought up in difficult families, they're in a tough, desperate situation, so on and so forth. We won't go into that today, because today we're going to dive back into current events. And I just want to start by playing you this little clip.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now have the victory ceremony for the men's 400 metres T38. The medals tonight will be presented by the Right Honourable George Osbourne MP, Chancellor of the Exchequer, who is accompanied by Mr Chris Brownridge.
First booze that we've heard all week at the Paralympic
UK.
Stadium.
And one more time.
The medals tonight will be presented by the Right Honourable George Osbourne MP, Chancellor of the Exchequer.
You hear that, Georgie boy? That's the will of the people. The people that pay your inflated salary. They don't like you because you're a scumbag and nothing more than a hollow puppet with a corporate hand up your ass. If politicians were true leaders that people looked up to and respected, who truly represented the people who they claim to represent, that actually had real ideologies that they were consistent with, then they'd be cheered. They'd be held up as an example of what humanity could be. But they're not. At least most of them in power are not. They're just empty suits, talking heads. Everything they do is for their own or some other vested interest. And everything they say is just spin and manipulation to hold off and confuse the plebs until the next election. And then the plebs elect a new group of liars to continue the same agenda. They're all in it together to push the same agenda of authoritarianism and globalism. They just kick the football back and forth. When we're fed up of one party, the other party lies about what they're going to do when they get into power and how they're different from this party. Then when they get in power, the same agenda of tyranny and globalism and control continues. And when we get fed up of that party, we've got such short memories because we're dumbed down by the crap that they put on television, we'll vote back in the other party that we didn't like to begin with. And back and forth we go. And the tyranny continues. Well, we're here to break that tyranny. And it actually amazes me that the PR machine that is government actually thought wheeling out George Osbourne in front of a stadium full of the public could end any other way than it did. This is the poster boy for the financial cuts that are ruining this country right now. I'm surprised people didn't storm the field and take him down with pitchforks. How could they think that this was going to work out well? Especially at the Paralympics, when the cries of the disabled are falling on deaf ears, when thousands of sick people are being deemed fit for work so the government can claw back more taxes to pay the interest on the national debt. The wheelchair racing team should have steamrolled this prick. Now, I'm not saying there aren't scroungers and people that exaggerate sickness so they can get benefits or whatever. But the government have gone above and beyond those people. Legitimately sick people are being deemed fit for work. It's like we're going backwards to the days of the workhouses or something. And it really is a crime. They're basically redefining what sick means. So they can say, oh, you're not sick. But they change the definition. When these people go for their assessments, their doctor is no longer given any say. You know, the person that actually knows how sick the person is, they're excluded from the process. There's basically a checklist that a private company called Atos looks over, and then they compare it to what you tell them, even though the checklist is so skewed that people can't even express what's wrong with them. And that's that. You're fit for work. My sister, who has a severe form of obsessive compulsive disorder, it comes in different forms, but basically she has to complete like 6 or 7 hours of obsessive ritual behaviour before she can do anything else in the day. You know, thoroughly clean her room every day, then she moves on to doing the washing, then her own strange kind of grooming ritual that takes hours in the bathroom. All these things she has to do to remain mentally stable. If you take something out of her daily routine, then all hell breaks loose. And it takes like 6 or 7 hours before she can even think about doing anything normal. Is she lazy? Is she a scrounger? No. She's tried very hard to try and fit in to normal life. She had a job, but they didn't understand the illness. So when she's exhausted and can't do what she's supposed to do, then they fire her. And that's going to be the same for so many different people. Who wants to employ sick people? It's not going to work out whether the government's trying to force it or not. I remember when my sister was trying to go to college. She ended up quitting because of exhaustion. She had to get up at like 3 in the morning every day to do everything in her ritualistic behaviour before college. It just wasn't physically possible. Yet she's deemed fit to work. And yeah, there are people that can help and try and help her to work through this, counselling, you know, experts in the field, but that costs a lot of money. The alternative is to get some, you know, mediocre NHS shrink that you can see for 10 minutes once a month. It just doesn't work. And this new framework, this new government framework that has been put out there to test who's fit for work or not, simply doesn't recognise most mental illnesses. And because most mental illnesses are very case by case, they're individual things, and they just have this useless checklist that doesn't even take into account half the problems that people have, and it's dealt with in such broad strokes, it just doesn't work. People need personal assessments by doctors and experts, not some company that's just there to fill boxes, tick boxes. And just to show you how the new system is completely failing, this was reported earlier this year, it's from the Mirror. 32 die a week after failing test for new incapacity benefit. More than 1,000 sickness benefit claimants died last year after being told to get a job. So the people they deem fit for work in this new assessment are dying a few months after. Obviously they weren't fit for work, they were on death's door. We've used the Freedom of Information Act to discover that between January and August last year, 1,100 claimants died after they were put in the work-related activity group. This group, which accounted for 21% of all claimants at the last count, get a lower rate of benefit for 1 year and then are expected to go out and find work afterwards. And Mr. Cuts Osbourne wonders why he's getting booed at the Paralympics. And like I say, I don't know what thought is worse, that we have a group of criminals essentially running this country at the behest of private banking oligarchs and control freaks, or that we have a group of criminals running the country at the behest of a bunch of private banking oligarchs and corporate control freaks that are so deluded and out of touch that they think they can waltz onto the public stage without being booed. They should have stopped Osbourne at the gates for being a financial terrorist. This is a guy that lets the likes of Vodafone off the hook with billions in tax as the country goes down the toilet. This is the guy that bought a second home and claimed second home expenses, even though it became his main home, the one he lived in. You know, I don't know how many of you have second homes that you can claim expenses on. And then later Osbourne listed his massive farmhouse as his second home when he took out a £450,000 mortgage. So he could obviously claim the expenses on that too. Oh yeah, and he didn't pay capital gains tax either. Is this a moral person that should be in control of the country's finances when he's diddling his own money and giving breaks to giant corporations? Does that make sense to anybody? Just the idea that politicians are allowed to claim expenses for homes is a bit confusing to me. If you can afford 2 homes, I'm not sure why you should be cutting corners. And if your job requires you to live in a certain area, you should probably think about that before you get the job. It's not like claiming expenses for a hotel. If you bought a house, deal with it. But even more than that, I personally believe that politics and democracy, being a politician, should not equate to having a lavish lifestyle. Your be-all and end-all should be your passion for representing the people, not your salary and your paycheck and fudging the books. You should be wanting to do the right thing and setting a moral example for everybody else. You chose to be a leader, why don't you lead? You should be the example, you should lead by example. If you're claiming to be a public servant, then you should live up to that claim. I'm not saying live in complete poverty or not have some investments on the side or whatever. But you shouldn't be exploiting loopholes and fiddling the books and rubbing shoulders with corporations and making backhand deals. And then have the gall to tell the people what to do. You chose to be a politician. If you want to be a celebrity or a tycoon, then don't be a politician. So no, it's no surprise that Mr. Osbourne, or Theresa May as well, or any of these immoral, hypocritical scumbags were booed by the public. They should have been stopped and held as terrorists. So as normal people could carry on and enjoy the games without being disrupted by the sight of these broken human beings. They're all mentally ill. And I'm not being sensationalist. Let's define the word terrorism. Dictionary.com. The use of violence and threats to intimidate or coerce, especially for political purposes. That's the definition of terrorism, a common definition of terrorism. Well, think about it. That's the definition of government through and through. Are you not coerced and intimidated to do as the government says? Are you not beat by state forces when you try and have a mass protest? Are you not lied to and pressured to support war? Unjust war, if there ever is a just war. It sounds like terrorism to me. We have a system whereby the government steals our money by force. Ask anyone if they actually want to pay taxes. They steal our money by force, and when there's literally no more money to steal, they go and borrow it from the private sector with our future tax as collateral. So they can fund projects like the EU that take away our freedom and our ability to oppose their actions. They steal and borrow in our name so they can bomb innocent countries like Libya into smithereens, and then their buddies in the corporations can go in and suck the country dry. All while allowing the supposed terrorists to take over the country. It's a complete mindfuck. And remember, George Osbourne is the man that refused to tell the taxpayers, the people he's stealing off to fund this war, he refused to tell them how much the terrorist bombing of Libya actually cost us. So he's complicit in a war crime that was done in our name. If we flip over to Theresa May, who was also booed, check this story out. Despite 70% of the public voting otherwise in a YouGov poll, Theresa May has given the green light to extradite a British student to the United States for owning a website that linked to other websites that had copyrighted material on them. Something that isn't even a crime in this country, and which Google, which has offices in this country, does by the millions every day. You can find copyrighted material till you're blue in the face just by typing into Google. So who is she representing? Is that not violence for political purposes? Allowing somebody to be forcibly removed from their home and sent to a foreign country? It's no surprise that these terrorists get booed. I'm surprised more didn't happen to them. Government is terrorism by definition. The use of violence and threats to intimidate or coerce, especially for political purposes. Our leaders have a long history of terrorism. We've gone over it over and over on this show. Like I said, what do you think Libya was if that wasn't terrorism? Hand in hand with Al-Qaeda, NATO hand in hand with Al-Qaeda to remove Gaddafi. That was illegal even by their own definitions. Killing Gaddafi was not part of the equation. So they subcontract it out to their Al-Qaeda mercenaries. Of course, nobody gets punished for this, nobody gets brought to justice for this, because they make the rules. That's why Tony Blair, George Bush, Bill Clinton, whoever else you want to put on there, have never been tried for war crimes. You know, I've got a friend who supposedly studied history and is into politics, who posted on Facebook the other day this video from the Democratic National Convention. You know, he wrote in his little Facebook message, "Oh, Bill Clinton, like a boss." Like a boss? This guy, along with Blair, illegally bombed the Balkans into a refugee crisis. He's a war criminal. He's not a boss, whatever that means. He's a scumbag. But you know, this friend of mine is just a victim of the education system and the media in this country. He voted for Lib Dems thinking he was going to get change, when I said, look, the Lib Dems, they're just the same as the other two parties. They're all in it together. But then when Clegg flip-flopped and I was proven right, he's now a Labour supporter. Wake up! Wake up! But yeah, the Western leaders don't get charged with war crimes for their terrorism because they write the rules. They are the controllers, or the talking heads for the controllers, of the Western and Israeli-led geopolitical structure right now. And to stay topical, obviously the latest round of Western terrorism is in Syria, where the UK, America, France, Israel, as well as countries like Turkey, which is on the borders of Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the list is endless. All of these countries, the supposed civilized Western, allies in the Western countries, the good guys, they're all backing Al-Qaeda terrorists against one side of the Syrian people in the civil war. Not because they care about freedom, as if freedom is won by bombing and shooting innocent people, but because it suits their one world agenda, the geopolitical chessboard. We've done this to death on this show. Evidence that MI6 and special forces are on the ground coordinating the rebels, which is illegal. No war or resolution has been declared or passed. Admissions in the American media that the CIA are giving weapons to the rebels and it's ending up in the hands of Al-Qaeda. Israeli press admitting that Israeli arms are getting into the hands of the rebels. Rebels admitting that arms are coming from French businessmen. There's CIA whistleblowers saying that NATO are flying in Al-Qaeda fighters from Libya from the previous act of Western terrorism. I thought Al-Qaeda were responsible for 9/11. Isn't that why we're in Afghanistan? You can't make this up. And one of the latest reports from the Middle East, if you use Google Translate, you can get some interesting articles. A completely different perspective. I would argue a more accurate one. This one from aidanalgahad.net states that one of the top Al-Qaeda commanders, who's currently in Yemen, this guy trained by Saudi Arabia. The supposed 9/11 hijackers were Saudi Arabian, let's not forget that, but we still decided to go to Afghanistan on fake evidence that bin Laden was all blah 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 blah. We've been through it. Well, right now a deal has been struck to send Al-Qaeda from Yemen, which America is drone attacking for harbouring Al-Qaeda, but sending them to Turkey so they can cross the CIA and MI6 protected border into Syria. You can't make this shit up. They're controlling both sides. They use Al-Qaeda when it suits them on one hand, as their mercenaries, then they declare war on them when it suits them in another area of the world. And we don't have to go over it, but of course Al-Qaeda was born out of the CIA war against the Soviets in Afghanistan in the 80s. Bin Laden worked directly alongside America. But before I blow a gasket, I want to take you to a clip now of British politician George Galloway on Lebanese TV recently, pointing out the hypocrisy and the dirty relationships surrounding the so-called Syrian revolution, and why there's absolutely no credibility on the side of the rebels. They're essentially doing the bidding of the West and Israel and their allies in the Middle East, rather than actually fighting for true independence. It's a dirty war. It's not what they say it is. Here's the clip.
Well, there are many sons being killed in Syria. Many sons. Every one of them is somebody's son. Whether they are on the side of the regime or on the side of the opposition to the regime. They are all sons of Syria. And their blood has been shed in the thousands by both sides. Don't tell me that only the regime is killing sons of Syria. Those opponents of the regime are also killing sons of Syria. And it's just strange to me that they are ready to kill thousands, maybe tens of thousands in Syria, but they will not lift a finger for jihad in other Arab countries which are and have always been on the path of treason towards the Palestinian people. That's just strange to me. That's all I'm saying. There is Arab countries where there is no freedom or liberty at all, which have one family rule, who even give the name of their family to their country. But there is no jihad in such countries. But the jihad is in Syria, and it seems those who are fighting it are ready to spend an ocean of blood
to get their freedom.
To get their freedom. What about their freedom in the other Arab countries? Are they ready to fight there? No, they are collaborating with these other Arab countries.
It depends. Every country has its own demographic
you're right.
view.
You're right.
Every country has its own
You're right.
ideas, and what's happening in Syria, it's also happening in each world. And you
No,
know,
it's not.
every in each
No, it's
country
not.
need to do this revolution.
Well, when are you starting in Saudi Arabia?
Let's start. If there is
When are you starting your revolution in Saudi Arabia?
let the people
You are collaborating with Saudi Arabia against Syria. Don't tell me you are ready. Don't tell me you are about to. You are ready to. You have to. Don't tell me that you are ready to fight.
To make a revolution.
Let's not speak over each other. You spoke, I'll speak, you speak again, okay? Don't tell me that you are ready for a revolution in Saudi Arabia. You are collaborating with Saudi Arabia to make a revolution in Syria. Saudi Arabia is giving you money and weapons and jihadists. So don't tell me it's about the need for a revolution in all these countries, because you are in league with these countries. You're too clever a man to imagine this. So what you're asking us to believe is that a revolution supported by McCain, by Lieberman, by Britain, France, America, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar is a revolution for good, for haq? Is that what you're asking me to believe?
Same thing happened in all of them.
Are you asking me to believe that McCain and Lieberman are now on the side of haq? Are you asking me to believe that Netanyahu is now on the side of haq?
And we need to believe that a front with Israel in Julan stopped for more than 40 years, not a single drop.
So why is McCain supporting your revolution? Why is McCain supporting it? Because he wants a fight on the Julan?
Why did he support in Egypt? Why did we support in Libya? Why did he support in Tunisia? I don't care what does he believe. I don't care what they think in the United States.
You don't care.
I think about the Arab world. I think about the people are being killed in the Arab world. This is it.
No, only in Syria and the Arab world.
Not only in Syria.
No.
When
Gaza was being massacred,
even in Palestine,
when Gaza was being massacred, and the Arabs didn't lift one finger to support them.
This is why we need some revolution to start to talk about Palestine first.
That's why Al Saud is supporting your revolution?
I don't care about them.
No, you don't. You say you don't care about them, but they own you.
I don't care.
They already bought you.
Who?
They already have you in their pocket.
Who? They have who?
They bought you with their money. They bought you with their weapons. They bought you with their international political alignment. They already own you. Don't tell me you don't care about them.
Same thing happened with
Syria
Syria
and
and
Iran. Don't care. Look, don't tell me you don't care. They own you. You are theirs. You belong to them.
Iran owns Syria. This is the same. We have the same.
When did Iran kill the Palestinian people?
When did
what did Iran do to kill the Palestinian people? Iran are not even Arabs, but they are feeding the Palestinian people.
But they have their own project in the area.
Whether they have their own project or not, there is food in the bellies of the Palestinian people from Iran. How much came from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, and these other traitor countries who collaborated with Israel to starve the Palestinian people? You make me sick, you people, I must tell you.
Thank you.
Next one.
Thank you.
Good, we had our first walkout on Kalima Hurra. Alhamdulillah. The killing of the people of Syria might be denied by some. It's not denied by me. I am not with the Syrian regime. I am against their enemies, because their enemies are worse than them. I was not with Saddam Hussein, but I was against his enemies because his enemies were worse than him.
You can't get a more apt analysis than that. The only people that can bring freedom and democracy to Syria legitimately, authentically, are the Syrian people, without violence and without selling out to the West and their allies in the Middle East. Else all they're going to be is a puppet state of the New World Order, or the geopolitical alignment, as Galloway says. We're going to go for a quick break now, folks, and then we'll come back and run down some of the latest headlines. Here's Imani Hekima with a live unplugged version of his single Stepping Into the Light. You can get his debut album Manifesto on Amazon, and you can also check him out at youtube.com/Imani Hekima. Links will be in the info box, and I'll put them in the chat for the live listeners to check out. Don't go anywhere, keep it locked here on the WideShut Webcast on FTP Radio. Here's Imani Hekima.
spreading all across the land. The valley of suspicion, and it's getting out of hand. People waiting on disaster, they're giving up the race. When your mind is not the master, your life becomes a waste. 'Cause I'm stepping into light, stepping into light, stepping into light, stepping into light. Well, I once was a believer, but I had to let it go, 'cause it would not take me anywhere, it would not let me grow. Why do people try to label, to define and box you in? This may work for them, but not for me, 'cause now I look within. 'Cause I'm stepping into light, stepping into light, stepping into light, stepping into light. Yeah, no more running after shadows, dead end streets, no place to roam. No more running after shadows, 'cause now I've come back home. There's a brand new superstition spreading all across the land. The valley of suspicion, and it's getting out of hand. People waiting on disaster, they're giving up the race. Your mind is not the master, your life becomes a waste. 'Cause I'm stepping into light, stepping into light, stepping into light, yeah, stepping into light, 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 stepping into now, stepping into light.
There you go, Imani Hekima, stepping into light. A nice positive message there. And I think you can apply it to the counterculture and how a lot of people are kind of hooked on fear-mongering and what we've called conspiracy porn. I recently talked about the Olympics and how some people almost seem to want some kind, or wanted some kind of, nuclear holocaust by the Illuminati to take place, when there was actually little evidence to support the claim. I said it wasn't going to happen, it didn't happen. I went to the Olympics, it was quite a fun experience, but people were still kind of hooked on that idea that, it's going to be the end. Well, no, it's not the end. Let's stay positive. Let's not be blind believers in anything, mainstream media or alternative media.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid.co.uk.
Flip the pyramid.
Turning that pyramid on its head.
Flipping the pyramid. Flip the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flip the pyramid. Flipping the pyramid.co.uk.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid.co.uk.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flipping the whole paradigm of that hierarchical system on its head.
I think a new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a great...
Welcome back to the WideShut Webcast. I'm your host, Keelan Balderson, and now let's go through some recent headlines. Interesting blog out of The Telegraph last week by James Dellingpole, taking a libertarian perspective on the fascist, freedom-hating Green movement. David Cameron, renewable energy and the death of British property rights. As David Cameron may have learned when he read PPE at Oxford, property rights are a cornerstone of our liberty, our security, our civilization. Wiser political thinkers than Dave have long understood this. And he basically goes on to explain that the wind farm industry in this country which is built with government subsidies. Basically, we're paying for it anyway. Well, when they erect these useless turbines, nearby houses, people's homes, see a massive drop in their value. And nobody seems to want to take the blame for that. Who wants to live next to a giant wind turbine? Near me, out here in the sticks, people have actually left their homes, just fled, because of the noise pollution these things cause. They're an eyesore, they're an earsore, they're ruining property value, as Devonpole points out. And most importantly, despite their main purpose, they're not renewable or sustainable either. Rare earth minerals have to be mined to be used in the magnet mechanism within the turbines. Without Chinese slave workers polluting rivers in the process of obtaining these minerals, there is no wind power. And it's a crime that this is still being pushed with the lies about global warming. Moving on, almost 10,000 people in Wales prosecuted for not having a TV licence. Since 2005, there have been 70,382 cases brought in Welsh courts, according to figures from the Ministry of Justice, with 63,645 guilty verdicts, 90% of all cases. The high number of prosecutions means they make up around 10% of all cases heard in magistrates' courts and around 30% of all summary non-motoring offence cases. How many people are being prosecuted for TV licence evasion at courts near you? See the full data, blah blah blah. The fact that so much court time and money is spent on dealing with those who have not paid their TV licence certainly raises questions as to whether it remains the right way to fund the BBC. So, whether you support the licence or not, it's actually costing you far more than the fee, because of the cost of policing people that choose not to pay for the ridiculous licence. And who can blame them when the likes of BBC News are constantly pumping out propaganda to support the government's illegal wars and all the other rubbish that they spew? The sad thing is, those 10,000 people this year were obviously not aware that there is no legal process in place to enforce the licence. For you to be convicted, you have to open the door, admit you don't have a licence, give your name and sign a form. You don't have to open the door. You don't have to answer to these jumped up little Hitlers. Ignore them. Ignore the letters. They cycle the same ones over and over. It becomes comical. And they can't get search warrants unless they have evidence, which they can't get unless you let them in, which you don't have to do. So it's a completely fear-based system. They only get you if you're worried and scared of them. Well, don't be, because they're crooks. Freedom of information requests show that they've never ever used detection equipment in court. That pretty much proves that the detector vans don't actually have any detector equipment. It's just a con. It's all about fear. We briefly touched on 9/11 earlier, the fact that there was and still isn't any evidence that bin Laden orchestrated the attacks. The fact that the alleged hijackers were Saudi, yet they used it as a pretext to invade Afghanistan, which was in the works before 9/11 even happened. And even if you believe the official story that it was Muslims directed by Osama bin Laden from his cave complex, the hijackers were given visas by the CIA through a program used in the 80s when they were working with bin Laden against the Soviets. So they had the CIA, the American government, had a hand in it whether you like it or not. They were being followed by Israeli Mossad. Mossad agents were caught celebrating on the morning of the attacks. The list goes on and on. 9/11 stinks. And one important aspect of the 9/11 case is the physical evidence from the buildings themselves. And this brings us to our next headline: new 9/11 truth documentary among most watched on PBS this week. And this is out of the Digital Journal. 9/11 explosive evidence experts speak out is getting public attention and casting doubt on the scientific validity of the US government's investigation into the WTC tragedy. PBS, the first major network to air the programme, just days away from the 11th anniversary of the World Trade Center tragedy and months away from the US presidential election. A game-changing 9/11 documentary is ranking number 3 among most watched documentaries on PBS and number 1 among most shared. That's very positive news, an alternative view finally hitting the mainstream and proving more popular than other things. That should tell you something. The public are beginning to see through the corruption of government and their lies and cover-up. Moving on to our next story, no shooting at protest, police may block mobile devices via Apple. Apple have patented a piece of technology which would allow government and police to block transmission of information, including video and photographs, from any public gathering or venue they deem sensitive and protected from externalities. In other words, these powers will have control over what we can and cannot document on wireless devices during any public event. And I look to the popular internet meme, 1984 was not meant to be an instruction manual. And this is the double-edged sword of technology. In the people's hands, it can be liberating, but it can also be used by government for tyranny. And it seems Apple are choosing profits over freedom. And all you Apple employees that quite probably have Apple devices, you're not going to be above the law if this is wheeled out by government. So, what are you going to do about it? Al Jazeera news network website hacked by Al Rashidon hackers. The official news website of Al Jazeera has been hacked and successfully defaced by Al Rashidon hackers who are pro-Bashar al-Assad. The hackers left their deface page along with a message on the website with a Syrian flag on it. The hacker wished death to Al Jazeera and accused the network of being pro-American media with a hidden agenda. And judging by their coverage, I think that's quite obvious. And of course, the claim that Al Jazeera is pro-Western propaganda has been made many times by many people, and we can probably go into that in another episode. But moving on, despite the claim that bringing the Olympics to London would boost the economy, the taxpayer black hole did not spark a rise in consumer spending, BBC News reports. Retail sales fell 0.4% on a like-for-like basis from the same month last year, according to the British Retail Consortium. Excluding Easter, it was the weakest month since November. The feel-good factor from the Olympics failed to inspire spending, the BRC said. How many times are we going to let them tell us that events like the Queen's Jubilee and the Royal Wedding and the Olympics are going to be good for the economy? Because each one has actually proven that no, it's not good for the economy. And maybe when everyday people are sinking under the tide, we should perhaps rethink what we splash the public's cash on. Syrian minister accuses Mossad of assassinating Syrians. Information Minister criticises Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi after the latter voices sympathy for the Syrian revolt. There is no difference between Mubarak and Morsi, who has done nothing for the Palestinians and continues to sell gas to Israel. Syrian Information Minister Omran al-Zawibi accused Israel's Mossad on Monday of carrying out targeted assassinations in Syria, as well as aiding the rebellion which has brought Syria to civil war. He continued, "We found arms caches with the weapons used by the terrorists, and their source was Israel," he said. He also claimed some of the attacks against individuals and institutions in Syria had the, quote, fingerprints of intelligence services, including Israel's Mossad. Now obviously this information may be biased because it's coming from the Syrian Information Czar, but it does fit with all the other information out there. There's far too much smoke without there being fire. Mossad is definitely involved in Syria. And keeping with the Israeli theme, here's another headline: California passes resolution equating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. A new resolution passed by the California State Assembly attempts to limit criticism of Israeli policy on college campuses by equating it with anti-Semitic hate speech. The law urges California colleges and universities to squelch nascent anti-Semitism and encourages university leaders to combat a wide array of anti-Jewish and anti-Israel actions, according to the Associated Press. The Assembly's actions also drew criticism from free speech advocates. Carlos Villarreal, director, probably butchered his name there, director of the San Francisco chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, called the resolution irresponsible and dangerous because it combines legitimate condemnations of acts of intimidation and hate with specific objections to tactics used to support the Palestinian people. Translation: free speech exists unless it's about Israel. And to put that into perspective, our final story today: senior Israeli archaeologist casts doubt on Jewish heritage of Jerusalem. Let me just get that article. A senior archaeologist at Tel Aviv University has cast doubt on the alleged Jewish heritage of Jerusalem. Israel Finkelstein's claims have been made in the face of official Israeli and biblical claims to the occupied city. Professor Finkelstein, who is known as the father of biblical archaeology, told the Jerusalem Post that Jewish archaeologists have found no historical or archaeological evidence to back the biblical narrative of the Exodus, the Jews wandering in Sinai, or Joshua's conquest of Canaan. On the alleged Temple of Solomon, Finkelstein said that there is no archaeological evidence to prove it really existed. And I think that's an important part of the problem with Zionism. You know, we allow the atrocities against the Palestinian people, we allow Israel's warmongering in the Middle East, the total racism that underpins the Jewish state, essentially because of an unverifiable story about a man on a cloud who said Jews are the chosen people. You're not the chosen people. You're equal to everybody else on this planet. You don't have a right to nuclear weapons just because you're Israel. You don't have a right to influence politics in Western countries. And Holocaust or no Holocaust, a fairy story does not give you the right to steal land from innocent people and turn into the worst warmongers in modern history. It's simple. Don't be assholes and don't try and use religion as some kind of defense for being an asshole. And I think we'll leave it at that. Be sure to check out the other shows at FTP Radio, that's flippingthepyramid.co.uk. My website is wideshut.co.uk, and I'll catch you next week on the WideShut Webcast. Here's Logic with Spectator.
If you found the preceding information valuable, please consider buying a DVD or making a small donation of your choosing. Go to wideshut.co.uk/donate. That's wideshut.co.uk/donate. You are the resistance.
We are flipping the pyramid. Flipping the